review committee, the opinion review committee. At that stage, it was hoped that a disclosure such as this would potentially keep our audit opinion to a modified qualification, but also I think it does actually add to bringing together some of these more complex elements to our long-term plan right up front and what some of the risks are. So I think it is a good disclosure. This went through again the audit review committee on Monday, and they asked us to make some final tweaks to it, which we did, and it went through the audit review committee again yesterday, where they arrived at their final audit opinion decision, which Debbie is here to talk to in a moment. So that's the basis for this disclosure going up the front and how it came to be at this point of the process. Obviously, this part of adopting is adopting with an audit opinion. That has been tabled in front of you this morning. Apologies, I did send out a version at 8 AM this morning. There's actually been a subsequent change to some of the wording in that, which is in the copies that is printed in front of you. The version that I had sent had referred to some words around reasonableness and that sort of thing. That's now been revised to reflect the fact that the issue that we have in front of us is the uncertainty around some of these funding assumptions. In relation to these external funding assumptions, it's not that they can't happen. It's just that they are significant, and there is quite a level of uncertainty. We are still to go through the process of actually confirming and evidencing that they would all be able to be achieved. And I guess that is really the focus for us over the coming year or two is to actually go through that piece of work and give effect to your decisions around using these, I guess, relatively new for PNCC funding sources. I do want to remind you that for the most part, these funding sources of funding programs that are beyond year 3 of the long-term plan. So there will be opportunities to come back and revisit things if as we go through the investigations, they don't fully materialise as what's laid out in this 10-year plan. So, and I think the disclosure that we've put up front does outline some of that as well. Want to also just recap that you have made a decision previously that in the event that these external funding isn't available, we wouldn't proceed with actually doing any physical works until we had taken it back through the council chamber. So that's just to remind you, you have already made that decision to do that. And lastly, you've made some commitments to some accelerated debt repayment program, and that's viewed quite favourably as well as a mitigator for future years in case that extra capacity is required. So whilst the opinion is an adverse one, you have made some prudent decisions along the way to reflect the fact there is some uncertainty and risk already in bringing this LTP together. That's me. I'll let Debbie add some further words about the opinion and the audit process.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Cam. I just wanted to, first of all, just outline that to get to this point is quite a journey, and we work very closely with council and council staff. I've been before you a few times outlining concerns around the supportability and the uncertainty around a number of the funding decisions that you've got in front of you, a number of the capital projects that you've got. In particular, we've got Nature Calls at 550 million, which is 480 million plus inflation, plus a number of other capital projects. So as part of my review, I have to stand back and say, is this a supportable plan? And there can be uncertainty with any plan, but is what you've got in front of you supportable? As you'll be aware, there are still a number of uncertainties around around the numbers, around the cost of the projects that you've got in front of you, and around whether you can actually obtain the funding through third party. So as part of that stand back, we've had to have a look, and we have said that we have given it an adverse opinion based on the fact that the forecast information in the plan is unsupportable and highly uncertain. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't achieve it. Council now has a challenge ahead to go out and deliver on the projects that you have and to look for the funding. But in terms of whether we can actually say that this is a reasonable plan that is supportable, we can't. So that's our opinion. That goes into a little bit more detail, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right. Nothing else from you, the others? Okay. All right. Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Debbie. Could I start before I go to colleagues? So the significant items around external funding that you speak about, Debbie, are obviously the two larger ones. How we're treating the funding of earthquake buildings, and obviously, which is namely Te Manawa, the two big ones, Te Manawa and our city library. And then the second is around the Nature Calls resource water or wastewater plant. Are those the two you're referring to?
Yes, they're the major ones, yes.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that audit and all auditors take a worst case scenario on things?
So as part of the audit, we have to look at what is a reasonable assumption and what is the likelihood of that assumption, and then we need to get support for it. So it is a reasonable assumption that you can get funding through IFF, that you can get third-party funding. The areas that are probably of concern, there's two factors. One is the cost is unknown, and there's still a lot of work to go around the costing of all of these items, and there is a number that's been put into the plan, which is a number that council's willing to work to. Council then has to actually work to deliver on that, and then the second part of it is the funding that goes with it. So the funding is very much dependent on the cost, and then there is uncertainty around that funding as well. So it's a
okay. Can we treat two of you've sort of thrown back a couple of questions at us. So the funding side. Do you speak with your Crown infrastructure partners?
So I haven't spoken directly with Crown Infrastructure Partners, but I have spoken with colleagues who audit Crown Infrastructure Partners and other colleagues who have had dealings with Crown Infrastructure Partners. The message that I've had back is that your project is an ideal candidate for that. So that side of it, we're not questioning. It's more the fact that you don't know the quantum of the dollars, and whether you will then get 100% of what you've asked for.
Okay, so if these bigger projects always come, the devil's in the detail, and i.e. detailed design. So when Wellington City Council did their project, they were in similar territory and similar numbers. Did they get an adverse audit report because they didn't have a physical cost, because they didn't have detailed plans?
So the last LTP, they got a qualified opinion over this,
right.
But they were a lot further down the track. They had the costings. They also were in discussions with Crown Infrastructure Partners, and were a lot more advanced. I think they were just waiting for the final iteration of it.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks, Debbie. Firstly, just a question for you. The Chief Financial Officer just mentioned about how many of our investments are beyond the 3-year period. We also do, in the first sort of 3 to 4 years, have a significant amount of borrowing and investment. We're borrowing 245 million more in the first 4 years, which precedes some of those other bigger items that you've referred to. Do you have a view about the level of investment that we've got in the earlier years and the impact that might have on those, how we fund those other bigger programs that are uncertain?
So yeah, in your first 3 years, you've got a lot of investigative work around those other projects. So the actual timing of the projects that are uncertain are outside of those 3 years, but we do have to give an opinion over the whole 10-year plan.
Yep. So my question relates to the whilst we're doing the planning on the big stuff, we're also spending quite a lot on a whole lot of other things. Capital New, increasing our levels of service in terms of our capital programs, and we're obviously needing quite a lot of debt for that. So that obviously limits then how much debt we have for the bigger stuff later. And I just was interested more in whether you had an opinion about the level of investment that we've got in the earlier years.
So we did look at that, and we did consider that council could perhaps have brought back some of that earlier investment.
Right.
It's a council decision. We don't comment on policy apart from if it's going to turn into a something that is significantly unmanageable. But there is opportunities for council to have perhaps pared back some of that to then concentrate on the more important, must-have things.
Thank you. And just my second question relates to what we used to call rates affordability limit. And I see that the terminology has changed in our financial strategy to annual increase in rates requirement, which perhaps it might be a question for Chief Financial Officer. Why have we changed that? Have we changed the terminology, and if so, why? So I'm referring to it's page 177 in our long-term plan document. It just has rates. It just says rates, and it talks about the desire to keep rates increases as low as possible, to be balanced, blah blah blah. Anyway, it's got it aims to limit rates as follows, and then on the next page, which is page 178, that graph just says annual increase in rates requirement. Have we changed that terminology from rates affordability limit, and if so, why?
That's very Mr. Mayor. I can't speak necessarily to what it may have been, but I guess the graph is referring to the annual increase in rates requirement limit. So it's referring to the limit on your annual increases in rates.
Yeah.
So that's why it's titled that way.
So should we be actually including the word limit there? Because when it says rates requirement, it almost looks like a target rather than a limit.
I'd have to check, but at the end of the day, the intent of it is to basically signal what your annual increase in rates requirement is, green line, alongside what is the policy maximum,
Okay.
which is red line. So it is actually about trying to highlight what your forecast rates is compared to the limit that you have set.
Okay. So thank you for the clarification. So in year 2, where we exceed our policy max in that, in terms of that, do we need to include, in terms of audit view, do we need to include any sort of explanation or rationale for us exceeding that policy maximum?
Yes, so there is a disclosure. I can't remember
Sorry, I haven't had a chance to read all
the actual page, but there is a disclosure further down in your benchmarks. So as part of the audit, we also raised that and said to cross-reference, either put the variance explanation or to cross-reference to, that's probably at the back.
Is that in what's been tabled today, or is that in the long-term plan document?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's the long-term plan disclosure statements, which start on page 264. I'm just trying to find the
What page, sorry?
264.
Thank you.
And so on page 268, there is additional information or comment about the exceeding of the rates affordability benchmark in year 2.
Okay, thank you. And just my other question relates to it says on page 164 in the long-term plan, and also in the piece of paper that's been put on our desk, that early assessments for the Nature Calls project could amount to at least $1,000 per ratepayer per year. And when we asked the question about that on the 10th of June, I thought that it just hadn't been updated and it was going to be looked at. But I'm just wondering, given that we've reduced the cost of that potentially by 100 million, is that amount still considered to be at least $1,000 per household per year for 30 years? Is that correct?
For you, Mr. Mayor, whilst we could alter that slightly to reflect the decision, there is actually quite a bit of uncertainty around just what the level of that is and how that would be distributed. We've got a fair bit of work to do to do that when we go through that modelling with CIP. So I guess we've gone for the conservative side and left the indication there, but we could reflect if we had to something slightly lower. But we just, at the moment, that's a really high level assessment. We would need to go into a lot more detail to actually work out what that will be at a more detailed level, because that's a piece of work that's still to come with the IFF application process.
Okay, thank you. That's all from me, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Just one comment that Councillor Naylor made around levels of service and increases. Can you identify where those levels of service increases are? I wasn't aware of any.
Sorry, I must have missed that. I guess the capital program breaks down into what's called capital new, capital growth. So capital new is, I guess, when we're talking the funding impact statements, also referred to as capital levels of service increases. So they're basically your upgrades and new assets that you might be building.
Okay. So loosely termed, they can be termed an increase in level of service.
Yes, because they're not a renewal.
All right. And Debbie, you spoke about council, to you now, you spoke about council perhaps dropping some projects that weren't critical. Could you just, are we talking about a community library upgrade or a civic marae or a piece of sporting equipment? Is that what you're talking about?
So we haven't gone through and said council, made a judgment on what council has or hasn't included. The comment was more that there are some things that could be seen as not critical, and if council were to look at funding, if particularly if you couldn't get your IFF funding, then that could be something that you would look at.
Okay, and just teasing that out, do you not think we have an opportunity to change in an annual plan or another?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the upfront disclosure that has been added into your long-term plan does actually make comment about if you don't get the funding that you need, that you could reprioritise. So that is now covered. So
in your opinion, do you think council has enough levers to make a change in direction if the worst happened?
I'm quite confident that you do, that you could pull some levers and reprioritise.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following on from Councillor Naylor's query about the using the special the SPV for Nature's Calls, and we've reduced the budget, but yet in the narrative it's still saying that could amount to at least $1,000 per ratepayer. So that was the query before. How was it? I'm just working out the narrative and what we're telling our community when we cut a budget which was out in the draft at 647 million and cut 167 million out of that budget to make it 480 and still use that line that is going to be about a $1,000 per ratepayer. Can I push back down further on that to why we haven't got a more up-to-date figure, or why it hasn't moved the dial in this narrative?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, two things. First thing is the reduction that we would be doing this against would be the inflated version. So I think it's about just over 90 odd million. So
Okay.
well,
yep. Sure. Take that point.
So I guess we could make being that is a narrative we could explore, and I'd have to check with the auditor as well, make sure that they're comfortable, but could explore whether we can apportion that change in, but just remembering that it is still quite a high level estimate at this point in time, and we had explained through that is a high level estimate. That's why it's coined as at least. I guess the risk is if we the risk to you is if we reduce it and go through that process, along with the fact that the interest rates and things on lending that have also gone up in the same period of time, that we may have to come back to you again and say, well, actually, this is higher. So we've only done it at a very high level estimate at this point. That's why we've not made a significant change.
Okay. Good with that. The next question I've got is on our headroom, where we've our financial strategies with the debt to revenue ratios of 250 that we've got, and we can go to 280. So I appreciate that space, but can I understand the impact of the off the books debt servicing? Is that included into the 250 headroom when we're doing this financial modelling?
No, it's not, because by nature it is off the balance sheet. So we as in the council doesn't borrow for that. That's borrowed for by the SPV that would be set up by Crown Infrastructure Partners for us to borrow against, and that they create that levy, which goes as a levy to those who are going to benefit from what's been created. So that's why we would go down that avenue, is because that doesn't feature within council's own borrowing constraints.
Yep. Okay. I'll add comment on that. And then just recently, when we've had the update on wastewater nature calls, this is a question around timing of our long-term plan with the nature calls budget line, that we've got $1 million in next year, but understanding that wouldn't be enough for any land acquisitions if opportunities for a willing seller, willing buyer type of notion come up. Can I understand what would happen if we've impacting on bringing any of that budget forward into those earlier years for those type of needs?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, what would happen would be council would obviously have an opportunity to make that decision to do so. In the interim, that would consume some of council's debt headroom. The way the IFF works is that you can get funding for the total program cost. So regardless of whether we had already spent it, you could actually transfer that into the SPV if we so wished. That would be a decision as part of that application process if we would, and we would in the meantime be responsible, I guess, for at least funding the interest holding costs until that was up and running. So that's how that would work.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, look, thank you. That is the questions done. I'm actually going to break because I'm sure there'll be a bit of comments because this is the end of a long process for both the officers and the council itself. So we'll just break for morning tea. We'll be back into the chamber at 22:11. Thank you.